You may have read somewhere that Saturn was the most distant planet from the Sun that ancient people knew of. But did you know that Saturn has ears? Well, that's at least what good old Galileo thought when he first observed it. His telescope was kind of shoddy compared to modern ones, and so it didn't allow him to figure out that those so-called ears of Saturn were actually the now very famous rings of Saturn. Saturn has a lot of other interesting properties other than its rings, which we'll definitely cover in this lesson as well. Saturn, the second largest planet in the solar system, is an interesting character. Firstly, its diameter is more than 9 times than that of Earth, and so it's pretty close to the size of Jupiter, about 85% as large. Its mass is 95 times greater than Earth. That would be like comparing you to an African elephant. There's a big difference. But here's the cool thing. Despite this clearly serious size and mass discrepancy, which planet do you think would float in water if you had a large enough tub to put them in? It's Saturn. Saturn's density is about 70% that of water. That's not just a neat factoid. Actually, it tells us something very important. Such a low density implies that Saturn's makeup has to be dominated by light elements like hydrogen and helium. The hydrogen and helium were attracted by the protoplanet that later became Saturn by way of gravitational collapse. Gravitational collapse is a process whereby a growing celestial body captures gas from the solar nebula through gravity. It's like the protoplanet is a sponge. Go to your kitchen and fill a little saucer with some water. Then go find a dry sponge. When you place the dry sponge in the saucer with water, what'll happen? The water will disappear into the sponge, and the sponge will swell up and get bigger because it's sucked up all that water. That is sort of what a protoplanet, our sponge, does with the gas in the solar nebula as it sucks it all up and gets bigger and bigger. As Saturn grew, heavy elements sank to the center of Saturn and formed a core. Around that core, a mantle of liquid metallic hydrogen formed. Liquid metallic hydrogen is a kind of liquid hydrogen formed under very high pressure that's partially responsible for forming a magnetic field around Saturn. When compared to Jupiter, Saturn is smaller. Since it's smaller, its internal pressure is lower. Because the pressure is lower, there is less liquid metallic hydrogen, and thus its magnetic field is weaker, likely as a result of this. Essentially, Saturn is like a small magnet compared to a bigger magnet, Jupiter. Obviously, the smaller magnet will have a weaker magnetic field. Okay, let's switch gears to ears. The ears Galileo thought he saw. Those ears, like I mentioned before, were actually Saturn's rings. The rings are composed of billions of particles of ice that may have been formed from a large impact or many impacts on Saturn's icy moons as comets slammed into them. Some of these ice particles are tiny, microscopic actually. Other ones are really big, bigger than a house. Last but not least, Saturn has over 50 known moons. Saturn's largest moon is called Titan. And here's another cool factoid for you to bet money on at the bar. Titan is actually bigger than a planet in our solar system, the planet Mercury. Take that, little Mercury. A moon is bigger than you. Saturn is the second largest planet in the solar system. It's a lot bigger than Earth, but it would be the one that would float on water because its density is about 70% that of water. Saturn's makeup is dominated by hydrogen and helium that was collected during its protoplanet's gravitational collapse, a process whereby a growing celestial body captures gas from the solar nebula through gravity. As Saturn grew, heavy elements sank to the center of Saturn and formed a core. Around that core, a mantle of liquid metallic hydrogen formed. Liquid metallic hydrogen is a kind of liquid hydrogen formed under very high pressure. Saturn has lots of moons, and Saturn's largest moon is called Titan, and it's actually bigger than Mercury. Saturn's beautiful rings are composed of ice particles, ranging in size from microscopic bits and pieces to that of houses.